I'd like to first start by welcoming my panel members to the stage. Shelina, Janmohammed from Ogilvy, Ramya, Gopalan from the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, Martina Macpherson from the Network for Sustainable Financial Markets, and Samina Akram from Samak Ethical Finance. Welcome. Thank you. And thank you to the audience for staying with us through this panel discussion. It's going to be quite busy. I'm going to start with a definition of impact investing. We're going to go through a few examples of products in the market, and then we're going to discuss challenges and opportunities, and hopefully leave a little bit of time for Q&A. So I'd like to start by asking one of my panel members to simply define impact investing for us first, and that would be Martina, and then I'll swiftly hand over to Ramya to give us a sense of the kind of products that are being issued at the moment in that space. Martina, over to you.
Tasneem, thank you very much. And it's an interesting question because there are many answers. There is just not one definition, at least at present, for impact investing. There is probably not even one definition for sustainable investing or sustainable finance, the sphere that I'm closely aligned and assigned with. What there is an opportunity and a challenge to manage this plurality and the diversity of different concepts out there currently in this space, because social impact is all about lenses, and it's about a just transition. We're going into that a bit later on, across the spectrum of capital. And the work I've been doing over the course of last year with the UK government task force on social impact investing in the subgroup Better Reporting was to look at the full spectrum of different approaches towards investing, from a very traditional approach, which is actually finance first, to a philanthropic approach, which is impact first, and to look at the grey zones, the 50 shades of grey in between, which are the other outstanding areas of responsible investing, sustainable investing, and impact investing. And what we also did was we looked at how these different approaches align with underlying themes, with inputs and outputs. So that's, for instance, inputs, standards, principles, instructions, metrics, or tools. When you look at outputs, that's actually the different type of management information required, the investor or index reporting, the different type of channels used for information, and of course the public reports out there in the public domain by companies as well as by investors. And it's all about the approaches in the context of compliance. Are we talking about frameworks here? Are we talking about alignment? What does that mean when we look at mandatory versus voluntary frameworks, or normative frameworks, regulatory frameworks? A lot of them have been developed in the space over the last 5 years or so. Very happy to dive into that as well in a moment of time. But a lot of work is still to be done in order to bring further alignment and collaboration and ultimately product innovation. Last but not least, it's all about the targets as well and the target practitioners. So it's actually about the approaches, the alignment with sectors, with a wider investment chain, with the sizes of entities and investors involved, and their expectations to meet specific values or goals.
Thank you very much, Martina. So we can say that impact investing is about generating an environmental and or social return in addition to a financial return. And I remember your spectrum, which is on the left side, you have competitive financial returns in addition to environmental or social returns. And on the right side, you have the compromised financial returns with a priority for the social or environmental returns. And then that's where your 50 shades of grey come in, right? There's that spectrum in between. And depending on, and that's what we want to explore today, is where is Islamic impact investing on that spectrum? And how have we moved, if at all, from, is it right to left, right? Because it always starts on the right side, where you compromise financial returns and then you come to a more sophisticated structuring to be able to do more than that. Great, thank you very much. Ramya, over to you. Some of the products we're seeing at the moment.
Thank you. So I wanted to start by saying, actually, I'm not a financier. This is my disclaimer, but that doesn't mean I don't care about the numbers. And I wanted to pick up from the point made in the previous panel, which is to cite some numbers to you. Yes, the SDG financing gap is 2.5 trillion. dollars annually. But we're still seeing from an Islamic social financing aspect, we look at volume of Zakat, which is $1 trillion annually. We look at projections for Islamic financing assets, it's about 3.2 trillion by 2021. And if we look at total private capital assets globally, it's around 200 trillion. So clearly for us, it's a no-brainer that a lot of the sophistication that Islamic philanthropy and Islamic financing can bring in terms of efficiency and innovation can help to solve some of the bigger problems that we face in the world today. So we at IFRC didn't want to look at Islamic financing as just another source of financing, but actually wanted to look at how can Islamic financing lead the transformation of making financing in general work for development and humanitarian issues. And this is where we have been working with a number of scholars, financiers, and humanitarians, firstly bringing them all together to look at what might be the co-creation of products that we can actually develop, as opposed to a one-size-fits-all. So one of the first projects we looked at is international Zakat financing from a state in Malaysia that had an excess of Zakat collection to providing drought assistance in Kenya. We were able, with $1.1 million, we were able to impact 1.4 million lives through rehabilitation of borewells and farming that yielded an impact of $20 million for the community. This was further paid back. The 1.1 million was 500,000 of this was paid back, which was then repurposed for the next neighboring community. Which was a great example of demonstrating that Islamic financing or Islamic philanthropy can go beyond just charitable giving, but actually provide sustained impact for the communities many years to come. A second product was around improving efficiency through the use of fintech or blockchain, and looking at how do we actually improve the current distrust that exists amongst institutions on how financing is being used, to look at how this can actually provide transparency and traceability of contributions to demonstrate how it impacts in the field. And finally, a third initiative that we are working on at the moment, which was actually launched just last week at the UN General Assembly, is in partnership with the Islamic Development Bank. This is called the One Wash Fund and Sukuk. It's essentially a scalable outcome fund to provide water, sanitation, hygiene, and health services for 29 OIC countries, impacting about 5 million lives. Why these 29 OIC countries? They're some of the most cholera endemic countries in the world. Out of 40 identified, 29 are in OIC. And it seemed an obvious merit of how Islamic financing can demonstrate with a combination of philanthropy and private capital, how it can actually have impact in these countries for communities in need. So I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Ramya. So that's really a very fresh example. That was the One Wash Fund that was launched last week. That is the, as I understand it, philanthropic vehicle, which will then pave the way to a sukuk that will be launched next year,
Yes,
correct?
absolutely.
So it's a kind of way of using philanthropic capital to de-risk a product that can then be provided to the more institutional market.
Absolutely.
Great. And what was the size of this? What's the size of the expected sukuk, if you can elaborate?
So we're looking at a WASH program, as we call it, for about 100 million to 150 million possibly. So the size of the sukuk essentially depends on the philanthropic capital that will be mobilized for the outcome fund, which will be kind of the cash collateral for sukuk issuance. But at this time, we're estimating it at 80 million to 100 million. Now, I have to say that if we look at the sukuk market in general, so obviously we get a lot of reactions saying that's not a big number and, you know, why is it so difficult? But there's a lot of challenges to look at, especially when serving the humanitarian development sector. We're looking at absorption capacity. We're looking at readiness of countries that are pretty much in fragile contexts very often. And they actually don't, because traditional development impact bonds or even sukuks tend to shift implementation risk towards financiers or investors. The likelihood of them serving low-income or middle-income countries is very limited. So the innovation in our product is actually to be able to shift that implementation risk to traditional donors who already understand it, let's say like UKAID, where the investor then is only confronted with the credit risk of these donors who are contributing into the philanthropic fund, as well as private philanthropists, obviously, which is something an investor understands. The risk-return match is obvious. And therefore, it makes available, the scale of these bonds is available for low-income and middle-income countries, which actually often get missed when we look at the Sukuk or general bond market as well. And these are the countries that are most in need. And I think it's pretty obvious in the context we look at that most of them are OIC member countries.
Right, thank you. And this is a product, though, that is very much institutional. The threshold, I mean, the minimum investment size would be something north of $1 million?
When you say the philanthropic side of the Sukuk?
For the Sukuk.
Yeah, well, for the Sukuk, we're looking at fixed income investors as well as institutional investors, just because we're able to shift that implementation risk into just credit risk.
Right.
As opposed to conventional bonds, where investors are faced with implementation risk, and so they often are not able to invest at the scale that they would like to.
Thank you. Martina, on the institutional side, can you talk a little bit about the Sukuk market, but also do you think that there is a need for more instruments for other potential investment groups or target market shares like millennials or individual investors or the retail population?
Absolutely, Tasneem. And just to give you an idea of the market size, so we're talking generally, sustainable investment strategies are now estimated to be US dollars 30 trillion. The green bond market at large just actually reached in H1 2019 or broke through the barrier of 150 billion, which is quite an achievement. You know, we're talking about roughly under 10 billion, you know, just a decade, not even a decade ago. This all changed in 2013, actually, when a variety of different, not just development banks and multilaterals, but actually a variety of different issuers joined the market. And I'm coming back to that point in a moment because it's very important for building momentum and scale. But the green Sukuk market is unfortunately still in its infancy. We have seen sovereign issuances from Morocco, Marrakesh Action Proclamation. I was there. That was a follow-on from the Paris Agreement, back actually announced at COP22 in 2016. We have seen issuances by Malaysia, and we are seeing increasingly, obviously, a variety of different Sukuks joining and coming onto the market themselves, especially in and from the Middle East. But actually, and I think they said they are setting to rise actually to 130 billion this year as a Sukuk market. But the green Sukuk market actually accounts for less than 1% of that market. And that's actually a major challenge.
Wow, so we need to get more corporates engaged
that is
than
exactly
just the sovereign and the multilateral angle.
Correct, because we have currently, you know, we have seen in that trajectory of green bonds, exactly as you outlined, we had the development banks, the multilaterals. We have seen, interestingly, on the green bond side, the sovereigns joining the ranks, just most recently on the wider mainstream green bond side. So Sukuks, it has been slightly, actually the journey has been in reverse. We have seen the sovereign issuers first. We now need the municipalities, the local governments, the cities. And of course, we are seeing the multilaterals and the development banks, but we also absolutely need the corporates, because the corporates change the green bond picture. We were talking under 10 billion of issuances before 2011. We saw the picture changing massively, globally, at scale, when actually two things happened in 2013. The first, corporate issuers joined the ranks, and secondly, we saw standardization alignment. That brings me back to one of the points I made earlier. The principles-based towards the rules or standard-based approaches to develop products for primary as well as secondary markets. And that's a development that has actually happened successfully through standardization alignments of green bond principles and taxonomies in 2013 into 2014 when the ICMA green bond principles were launched. And we need exactly that type of development, and we just don't need it only for green. Let me be very clear about this. We need social Sukuks. That is the opportunity for the people in the room and beyond, because Islamic finance and banking is all about community. And ultimately, community social bonds or social investments are at and in scope for this development. We have seen it, the green bond market has actually grown towards social bonds, sustainability bonds. We now need to see this for this market.
Thank you.
That's
thank
the opportunity.
You. Now, the key here is also community, right? And corporates will be interested in doing this more if the communities around them and their client base shows interest in that as well. And so now we go into the individual and the retail market, and I thought, Samina, could you give us a sense, of the interest? Do you think that there is interest in impact investing instruments for Muslim individuals?
Thank you. Well, it's interesting because today actually marks the 150th birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi. And one of my favorite quotes of Gandhi is that in a gentle way we can shake the world. And I think the ESG, SRI and Islamic finance space is 100% shaking the world. It's interesting because the movement starting in every now sphere of society. We see the youth movement, a 16-year-old child in Sweden. And I'm already crying just mentioning her name because the impact that she has made in the world is phenomenal. And don't ever let the media or anyone downplay what she has done. This one child stood up. Today, 1 million people in Italy are marching for climate change. Today, 1 million people in people like Pakistan, India, all over the world. It was one child that brought about this change. In a gentle way, we can shake the world. I think it's, for me, it's humbling. Because when the children rise, we know we're going to start seeing changes. For years, there's been a lot of pressure on governments to act, on corporations to act, but actually the pressure should be on all of us to act. And especially for us Muslims, let's go back to that state of Medina that our dear Prophet created. The first legislation that came out from there was to love each other. Which country in the world, apart from New Zealand, has said that it's no longer about economic growth? We are going to measure our country by mental health, for how happy you are. And I think what's so phenomenal is the fact that people, chairmen, of JP Morgan and places like in the world are now coming together. And they're actually saying that it's no longer about shareholder value. It's now about, how we're kind of treating our planet. And it is important, the mental health of the employees in our workplaces. How can we create better banks? How can we create better governance, leadership styles? And, for me, it's a phenomenal time to be in this space. Around 10 years ago, I remember I used to, Martina was the head of indices at S&P. And I would often be sitting in the audience and just admiring the incredible work she was doing within the ESG space. But I think it's to be fair to say, Martina, that a lot of us, they kind of thought we were just tree-hugging people. Whereas now, it's actually the chairmen that are coming to people like Martina. This central bank alliance that's come together, 40 central banks around the world are now sort of looking at their climate change policies. And they're all panicking. Even in the, I get emails, I'm now advising the central bank of this, and we don't know what we're doing. Do you know anyone in ESG that we can speak? In a gentle way, we can change the world, and it's happening. Now, I want to talk about two people that are the driving force of this change. Just like Sudan, it was the women and it was the youth that brought about the revolution. We're seeing this within the Islamic finance, within the SRI, within all these spaces. And what's so interesting for me, my background was a banker, and like anyone that's worked in the banking industry, it wasn't that romantic idea that I thought it would be when I joined Merrill Lynch. It wasn't about, changing the world or making an impact, but you know what, I kind of understood the problems and the issues that we were facing as a financial industry. So there I started getting involved in a lot of initiatives to kind of, highlight Islamic finance and other, alternatives to the model that we had. And I can see Umar Sheikh in the room. He, from the start, these people have really helped my career, and they've really helped me to kind of bring, this kind of space to the agenda of a lot of very senior people. On the back of a diversity forum called the Internet Multicultural Network, we organised an event, again, with a lot from Umar and other people's help, where we managed to get Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, Deutsche Bank, some of the top 10 investment banks in a room. It was a part of a forum that was part of the Internet Multicultural Network. And we organised just a lunch, evening event, What is Islamic Finance? We had Sheikh Nizam Yaqub, one of the world's greatest scholars that flew in from Bahrain. We had Iqbal Khan, who is easily one of the founders of the industry. And that event in itself, we had 600 bankers that came from these organisations. Now, within a week, I was offered to head up the Islamic Finance Wealth Management platform at Merrill Lynch. That again gave me incredible, I was now living my passion, my dream. But from there, I think I kind of came to a place where I wanted to do more. So I left Merrill Lynch, I set up my own consultancy firm, and then I realized that women, it's even if you look at some of the studies that have been done, even in impact investing, it's women that have been long in the game before the guys turned up. And it was, I think, Martina, you'd agree, I think Fidelity last week, they actually had a report, I think 30% of it was women that are kind of leading the impact investing space. Mm-hmm. And I would often go to these rooms and I would meet women that were actually there. They wanted to, come to the Islamic finance industry because they wanted to actually make a change. And so, but there was very few of us. So what I did, one day I went to an event, there was 300 men and 3 women, so us 3 women got together. We set up a forum called the Women in Islamic Finance. We didn't really know what the objectives or what we were trying to do at that point. But over the years, it's just become more clearer and clearer. We started off with 30 members. Today we have 8,000 globally. Our first event was we launched at KPMG, and Sheikh Nizam flew in, and I really wanted to highlight the female contribution of our own Muslim world. So the keynote address was on Hazrat Khadija al-Kubra's contributions to business, trade and Islamic finance. And to me, I don't know, I know we have scholars in the room, but I don't know if I'm saying something controversial, but was she not the founder of this industry? Because we know that some of the contracts that we're doing today can go back, right? to what she was doing. But me, being a banker, often I would sometimes, sort of be told, well, you shouldn't really be in the room at the beginning. Now I think, we have more visibility of women and we're seeing amazing kind of things happening. But I think over the years, I've come to realize that we're now in a very crucial kind of place where change is about to happen, and it's quite exciting. And sometimes in the world, these people like Trump and Johnson and all these far kind of extreme crazy people are needed for the right people to align. So under Martina's forum, that's actually concentrating on the millennials, on our forum where we're trying to see how we can work with the SRI and the ESG and all these other spaces. Under that umbrella of social responsibility, I think now we're seeing that whether you're Hindu or you're Jew or anything like that, they want to come together. And very quickly, I just want to say that, the SRI industry, just go and look at the history of how this movement was set up. It was a political and religious movement. The SRI industry got together and basically said its very beginning principle was that we want no part to play in human rights violations. So what happened in South Africa was the greatest human rights violation, right? So here we see people literally outside Barclays and Shell and saying that we want no part to play in this. And you know what? When they started their economic boycotts, that's when South Africa became free. So today, as Muslims, we need to really learn from these industries. So what's happening in Kashmir is wrong. What's happening in Palestine is wrong, and we can do something. We have such incredible people in this room. We can do something.
I love your passion, Samina. I got to stop you because we're running out of time. I need to. Thank you very much. But what is key to a lot of what you said is I didn't hear very many Islamic institutions. I heard Fidelity, I heard Barclays, I heard all of that. And I understand, and that's where, I would like to there's obviously a great consciousness coming out of the female Muslims and the millennials. But do they have the capital to shift things? I mean, if we're going to try and engage more communities or investors in impact investing, how are we going to get these other pockets such as retail and millennials on board? What's the gap? So Shelina, I'd like to ask you about a little bit more about the millennials, the Muslim youth, and whether they do have wealth or not, and what are the challenges you see in bringing awareness to that group of population.
Okay, like Ramya, I have a disclaimer, but a double disclaimer. I am neither a financier nor an institution. But the work that we do at Ogilvy is really thinking about people. And actually, it's quite easy to forget that the end goal of the finance that we have and the structures and the instruments we use is actually about people's lives, whether that's as investors, whether that's as people using financial products, or whether it's people who are beneficiaries of the kind of investments and the impact that we want to create. So we are very interested in what does it mean to be a Muslim investor, a Muslim consumer of products, or a Muslim beneficiary. And a lot of the work we do is to try and understand what attitudes are towards Islamic finance. And sadly, I have a much less rosy view than Samina about the way that young Muslims and Muslim women feel about Islamic finance. And a lot of this is drawn from the study that we were really privileged to work on with Gatehouse Bank. I think there are some copies outside, which really looking at UK Muslim attitudes towards Islamic finance. But actually, from our research, there are a lot of trends that follow around the Muslim world, which is that actually young people, thinking about 18 to 24s, actually have very little understanding of what Islamic finance even is. They don't have much knowledge, and they share their lack of knowledge with each other, which is... And further, when you look at the broader Muslim communities, actually the level of skepticism about Islamic finance is very high. The level of engagement is much lower than we would expect. Less than half of Muslim communities in the UK have actually ever used Islamic finance, which means that if we expect Islamic finance to have a broader impact outside of the Muslim communities, then actually if we can't even persuade Muslims to buy Islamic finance products or to use them or to advocate for them, then we're in really big trouble about the wider ethical implications of the industry that we have. And within that, there's also some really interesting data around how Muslim women know, learn, engage with Islamic finance. And the simple answer, and this is very broad brush, is they don't really know very much. They don't seem to talk about it very much. And they don't really engage with it very much either. And again, thinking about that kind of heart that Muslim women have, thinking about finance, for example, Muslim women are anecdotally said to contribute more to charities and to mosques than the wider community. The question would be, why? How do we encourage a shift in perspective around these questions? And really simple things like, why do we have almost no Muslim influencers that talk about finance? If you kind of scroll through your social media feeds, there's loads around fashion and beauty and a bit of comedy here and there, and you're going to get some Islamic dawah stuff, but we don't have people talking about finance and trying to contextualize that within the Islamic ethical framework. Who are these people? Where do we find them? How do we get to talk about those questions? And within this broader community framework, we had a little bit from my predecessors around people who are investing, whether that's just a very wealthy person or a corporation or an institution or a sovereign wealth fund. But we are finding that particularly in minority Muslim countries where Muslim families tend to become more settled or a little bit older, where is the thinking around investment? And how do those families invest for the future? What is quite interesting is in the data that we found is that the best users and advocates of Islamic finance were 35 to 44-year-old males. So there's something kind of interesting happening, but we have to think about who are those investors and what are they investing in. We've got to think about the broad consumer base. If we truly believe that Islamic finance products are beneficial for the people who use them, how do we get them to do that? But also, we're starting to see a shift towards a wealthier Muslim trajectory, middle class, upper class Muslims, but actually a very poverty-stricken group of Muslims who might actually be the beneficiaries within the same social societies. So how do we kind of match those people up in the way that we think about the ethics of Islamic finance and the way that structures can be put together to help the investors support those within their own communities?
Thank you. It's interesting you talked about the lack of consciousness in the female market and the millennial space here. Ramya, I remember you're part of the Thinkers, I think the Global Thinkers Forum you were talking about, the Global Thinkers Forum. Martina was talking about the Global Thinkers Forum, and you were talking about the representation from the Middle East, through millennials and women. So we see that maybe on the on the affluent side, there's a lot of consciousness and interest.
Absolutely.
Is that true?
Tasneem very interestingly and rightly stated. I'm part of a network beyond the millennials network that I'm chairing as president, a network for sustainable financial markets, which tries to bring together the next generation of sustainable finance or finance professionals and increasingly banking and insurance professionals who are all focusing on responsible and sustainable long-term ideas, concepts, thought leadership. I'm also involved as a mentor in the Global Thinkers Forum, and that was actually a forum launched by Elizabeth Philippou, one of the publishing heiresses in the world, also a former Al Jazeera reporter and a very, very renowned individual in the space of journalism, and Queen Ramya of Jordania. And what we are actually doing is the following. We are trying to move the needle when it comes to female empowerment and next generation enablement through a variety of different programs, one of them being the Athena 40 women's program, another one being the mentorship program with actually mentoring the next generation of potentially leaders in our various domains. And what's very interesting of what you stated secondly is around there is an affluent group in society, especially in the Middle East, that's also supporting these type of networks and initiatives, that's actually well aware of the opportunities and the necessity of getting engaged on these issues, and are actually in trying at least to allocate time and commitment towards the community and the various community activities out there, and that are also quite drawn to the investment opportunities out there. And I don't know if you've heard or seen the interesting studies by Morgan Stanley, Sustainable Signals. The latest report, the third one, has just been issued, and it looks at the broad spectrum of who and why millennial, female, and other mainstream investors are actually looking into the topic. And what's quite interesting is there is an interest in sustainable investment strategies, which also includes impact, that's rising globally. There is clearly an adoption of sustainable investing, which is up and rising, not at the same pace and scale, but nevertheless. And thirdly, there is an increasing demand for product. But there is a disconnect because the product development curve is not there. And we have also a disconnect in the moment. We're seeing a lot of institutional money moving down towards sustainable investing, social impact, and other more responsible investment strategies.
Is this
But
the
not
case though in
necessarily the
Islamic
retail.
finance? In Islamic impact investing?
In Islamic impact investing, no. And also not generally mainstream per se around the world. That's exactly the add-on for
Right.
all the type of markets on sustainable or
Right.
impact
And so
or
what can
Islamic
we
finance
do
investing.
to expand this market of Islamic impact investing? Are we poor on data? And what we heard from the previous panel as well, that there's so much giving out there and philanthropy going on, but the transparency is poor, and it's not therefore being allocated to the long-term social impact opportunities either. So is there an opportunity here for the philanthropic vehicles in Islamic finance to better modernize towards long-term impact rather than $1 in, $1 out? And what about measuring and data and transparency? Ramya, what do you see in that space in terms of measurement and data?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I agree with you. There isn't enough data as it exists in how Islamic philanthropy is being used in the field. And this is one of the driving factors with which we came up with the One Wash Fund. There is a need for clearly defined and measurable outcomes. B, the concerns of traditional donors, of traditional philanthropists are evolving, including Islamic philanthropists, in terms of where their dollar contribution is actually making an impact. C, there is a huge SDG financing gap. The needs are obvious across the world and specifically even for OIC countries. And finally, there is absolutely a need for greater innovation in products as well as ones that can achieve scale. And I think these four are the combination of factors that basically bring about how there can be greater efficiencies in Islamic philanthropy and Islamic investing. And the way we looked at it and why we call it the One Wash Fund and Sukuk is that we have designed it as a Sharia compliant, outcome-based security that can unlock private capital for humanitarian development needs. So there's a role, there's a leverage that Islamic philanthropy can provide for Islamic investing, each playing their respective role, each having their own value proposition. And the combination of that is what allows innovation and scale in these kind of products.
Samina, do you have anything you'd like to add?
It's interesting from personal experience. We also get approached a lot by just, can you provide us with data in terms of how many women are actually interested in Islamic finance? And it's something that we really do need to sit down and do, because I'm kind of seeing the opposite. I'm kind of this feeling that women do care about change. They want to make an impact. They're working in a lot of organisations that they've paid off their mortgages, or they're paying off their mortgage, but it's not really bringing them satisfaction. And they're quite conscious of that now. And I think because this is the area of social media, so everything now is out. Before you could hide things, you can't now anymore.
Right, thank you. Shelina?
I think one of the interesting things, if you look at the attitudes towards specifically Islamic financial institutions, so thinking about your questions about what's happening to actual Islamic finance institutions, is that there appears to be, both about financial institutions and about Muslim-run charities, a kind of discomfort or skepticism about what is happening to the money and whether it's being properly used or dispersed. So if you go back to that scale you were talking about right at the beginning about how competitive is something and which return are you getting, a lot of the consumers that we follow and study are very skeptical. They think Islamic finance is more expensive, or they're not getting the return that they should be getting for it, because perhaps there isn't enough emphasis on understanding other forms of payback or how financial instruments are structured. So people are very skeptical that something Islamic is really Islamic, which is a really difficult paradox to find yourself in. And equally, they also talk about how when they are giving monies to charity, Muslim-run charities, they seem very skeptical if there is a kind of a reduced, less than 100% percentage of what's reaching the beneficiary, which also, from my perspective, seems very strange, because you need to have effective charities that are run well. So there seems to be some kind of problem in the general Muslim discourse about what you get for your money and what happens to your money, and whether anything less than 100%.
So can I just ask, who are the people that were they investors that you were
we're
actually
talking
interviewing?
to general
See, that's
Muslim
the problem,
community.
because the research that we're seeing from Goldman Sachs, from Fidelity, they're really clear. I mean, Fidelity's last week, I think, they said 73% of millennials they surveyed are willing to pay more for brands that are sustainable. So the conventional reports are really in contradiction to what you're saying, and maybe that's where the problem is, and someone out there needs to actually interview the investors.
So I think the difference in the studies that you're referring to about millennials in general and Muslims, and we're talking about Muslims relating to Islamic institutions that deal with money. And so there is a lot of skepticism from Muslim consumers about Islamic finance itself and about Muslim-run charities more generally, which is much more anecdotal rather than data-driven. And also, coming from a marketing background, a lot of millennials say they're looking for purpose-driven, but the question is, does that really translate into what they're buying? So, for example, you have an advert like Pepsi's Kendall Jenner advert, and people get very upset. Does that change consumption behaviour?
Just look at, for example, the car industry. Electronic cars at the moment are exploding, and it's because of the fact that the millennials are saying that we're quite conscious now that we don't want to drive a car that's going to hurt the environment. This is why BMW and all the other competitors now. We even recently met Lamborghini, and they said they're trying to create the first eco-friendly car, because if we don't create it, Ferrari will. So I think it's translating in the background.
Thank you. Look, we're running out of time. I want to make sure that the audience has some time to ask questions, and then I'm going to try and get back to all of you and just in one sentence tell me what you would like people in this audience to do next to help this Islamic impact investing industry to move the needle, to make history. So can I just go for questions, please? Okay, the lady in front, please.
Hi, my name's Samina Kiani. I'm a journalist. I report on Challenger Finance and Islamic finance. And first, I'd just like to congratulate UKIFC for having an all-female panel. It's a rarity, so I'm really happy about that. I'd just like to remark on a couple of things that were discussed. In particular, Shelina, what you've said echoes some of the stuff I've come across over maybe 6 years of reporting on this. So what I've found, and what I'd like to compare it to, is the lack of knowledge that we have within the Muslim communities about Islamic finance. Now, if you look at the challenger digital banks we have at the moment, like the likes of Revolut, Monzo, and so on, look at the way they brand themselves and look at the way they communicate their message. It's simple, they use the language. I went to a Monzo event recently, and they said they purposefully used the language of a 9-year-old, not to be condescending to the customer base, but to articulate their message in a clear and transparent way so that everybody across the board can understand what their value proposition is. So you see, from my reporting, I find that is not the case in the Islamic finance industry. I think the language maybe needs to simplify, and the message just isn't getting across. So my question is, for those who deal with finance, specifically on this panel, is how can that be addressed? Because I think that is one of the fundamental problems you have.
Okay, thank you. I think I'll take the 3 questions and then we'll come back to our panel to just give their closing remarks and answer those questions. The second was the gentleman at the back over there, the middle, with the white shirt. Oh, I'm so sorry. My apologies. I saw. We'll get back to you.
Is issuance cost and current low interest rates stopping corporates from issuing green sukuks in the current point of time?
I'll get Martina to answer that after we get the gentleman on the right, who's been very, very patient. Thank you.
So thank you. I think a couple of things which we could factor in this space, and that is the role of tax relief. As you know, Shelina, so we are looking at zero cost, but you could get gift aid on charitable donations, which then can be used for your cost base. And it also helps the high-end taxpayer to reduce their tax liability. So it's a contribution from the Treasury for this cause. The other thing is that there is a new social investment tax relief, which gives the investor a tax relief on contribution. So you don't really need to offer any returns to them because they might get 30% tax relief and they won't ask for any more return on your project. I think if we look at these potential avenues, we can square the circle of doing things without commercial returns and bring them back to commercial returns, because these are not available to commercial institutions.
Thank you very much for that comment. And the lady on the left here, please.
Thank you. Thank you, because I put my hand down, but she encouraged me to take it. As one of those kind of young people that share with other young people their lack of knowledge,
Great, we have a millennial view in the room.
we have
Wonderful.
an architecture graduate, so I don't even have a finance background. My experience is kind of articulated with what Shelina said in the lack of knowledge, and I think it almost kind of stems from that age bracket, 18 to 24. 18, you take out your student finance loan, and half the people are telling you it's haram, half the people are telling you no, it's fine, and you're not really explained why. And if you if I go to my local mosque to seek that knowledge, being like born and raised in London, I don't even have a women's section in my mosque. And so my question is, how do I begin that process of educating and re-educating myself and my community on the role of Islamic finance in young people who don't come from a finance background?
Thank you very much. I'm afraid we'll have to stop at that because we're eating into your coffee break. My apologies. So just very quickly, from left to right, 30 seconds each on the questions out there. So Shelina, I'll just, for you, I think the last one, the last question there, and then we'll move on, and I'll raise with Ramya. If you have any, no, Martina with the
The
Sukuk.
green sukuk and why there's
Yes.
a challenge or barrier to
Yeah.
entry.
And then once we go through Shelina and Martina, if you have any comment to add, you're welcome to, both of you. Otherwise, we'll have to move to the coffee break.
Would you like to become a Muslim finance influencer? I'm sure there's lots of institutions here that would give you a platform and some resources to do that.
Yeah, 100%. But I wouldn't know how to kind of, like, that interest came from within me. But when it comes to my people around me, they're just kind of like, why do I need to know that? And just kind of explaining the importance of it without, I don't know.
So I think the takeaway in my 30-second comment is that we have the Islamic finance industry has a huge amount of work to tackle education, skepticism, and a lack of trust in in Islamic finance. And I think that's almost to your point about all the tax relief you can get. Only if you're bought into the idea that these industries and these charities and these financial institutions are actually serving a need in an effective way would you make the effort to do all of that. So I think those are the three areas that the whole industry, whether it's consumer, retail, or investment, really needs to focus on.
And you need mentorship. And there are not
Join our
enough
forum.
there are not enough female financiers out there who are in Islamic finance, perhaps, but that doesn't mean you can't go to male counterparts. So try and find senior bankers who are in Islamic finance who can mentor you and help you. You don't have to be an expert in finance yourself. Thank you. And Martina, on the
Very
bond.
quickly, I think it's less a question of interest rates. Green sukuks and green bonds are plain vanilla fixed income instruments, but there are a couple of barriers here, challenges, that are actually prevalent. One is actually the market is and remains still very small, so that means there is a question around liquidity, and that's especially impacting primary but secondary markets. There is a question around the standards and the verification systems. What we've seen at green bond principles and CBI and other taxonomies in the green bond space more broadly, verifying, underwriting ultimately the green bond projects is not yet common practice and as common standard for this particular more niche space, but it needs to be. There is an exposure potentially to a higher risk profile. We heard about, the technology and advantages that are being developed from Ramya here about blockchain technologies and others to measure impact. And that's very important for green bonds as well, for a verification of a project. But these technologies are not necessarily fully developed out there and not in the context for shukuks or Islamic finance vehicles. And hence, I think there's also an opportunity here for development. And then last but not least, there is this question around how you assure that the green proceeds are actually being allocated in the correct manner as part of this verification process. And there are still outstanding questions which are being addressed by further alignment of some of these standards and principles / taxonomies. Climate Bonds Initiative, for instance, has put a lot of effort in aligning their standards and processes around green bonds and green proceeds with actually Islamic finance concepts. But there is, again, need for alignment. So hence, what do we need? We definitely need more incentives. May they be based on tax? May they be based on public-private partnerships? May they be based on education and awareness initiatives? And that's why we're here. We definitely need more public-private partnerships to support the financing efforts alongside the SDG agenda. And here's also your opportunity, because there are blended finance mechanisms groups out there that are working closely with the UN to define these type of sustainable development initiatives around Agenda 2030, but they need to be out here in the Islamic finance space.
Thank you, Martina.
And last but not least, absolutely, we need commonality. We need that common language. We need that collaboration, as we said. We need that coalescence and the alignment of standards in order to get there. So the 3 C's, if you take them away, please bring them with you wherever you go. Thank you very much. On that note, I do have to end this conversation. Thank you very much to my panelists. Please give them a round of applause. And you can just